It was raining hard that night, the kind of steady drizzle that made the city lights blur into glowing streaks on the pavement. I walked into the Grandview Hotel's restaurant, pushing the heavy glass doors with one hand while the other rested instinctively on my belly. 7 months pregnant, and I was alone. I told myself I was here to treat myself to a nice dinner, but deep down, I knew the real reason. It was October 12th, our wedding anniversary. Or, it used to be. The matron greeted me with a polite nod and guided me to a small table near the corner, far from the bar where the laughter was loudest. The soft notes of a live piano filled the room, blending with the low murmur of conversations and the occasional clink of champagne glasses. I took my seat and smoothed the skirt of my black maternity dress. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the best I had that still fit. The waiter poured sparkling water into my glass, his eyes lingering for just a moment, maybe wondering why I was here alone. This place held too many memories. 3 years ago, Ethan had sat across from me here, sliding a velvet box across the table with a smile that made my heart race. 2 years ago, he'd toasted to forever with a glass of red wine. Last year, we didn't come at all. He'd said work was too busy. I had believed him then. I picked up the menu, pretending to study it, though my mind was elsewhere. I already knew I would order the grilled salmon. It had been my favorite since our first date here. Then, without warning, the air in the room shifted. A familiar voice, deep, warm, and painfully recognizable, floated across the space. I froze. Looking up slowly, I saw him, Ethan. My husband? Well, almost ex-husband. He was shaking the rain from his coat, his dark hair perfectly in place, his suit tailored to perfection. On his arm was a tall blonde woman in a red dress that hugged her every curve. She laughed at something he whispered, her hand sliding up his arm in a way that made my stomach twist. They followed the hostess, walking right past my table without noticing me, until they reached a spot just 3 tables away. Close enough for me to hear them, close enough for him to see me if he looked. My grip tightened around my water glass. I told myself to breathe. For the baby. For myself. Ethan's eyes wandered briefly across the room, and for a moment, they met mine. His expression faltered just for a second before he turned away and leaned closer to the blonde, smiling like I wasn't even there. And in that instant, I realized he had no idea what I was about to do next. I tried to focus on the candle between us, well, between me and the empty seat across the table. But my ears betrayed me. Every laugh, every word from their table sliced through the soft music. "She's beautiful," the blonde said, looking around the restaurant. "You have great taste in places." Ethan smiled, the same smile he used to give me when I walked into a room. Only the best for someone special. My chest tightened. He had brought her here. To our place. On our anniversary. The waiter returned with my salmon, steam curling from the plate. I thanked him quietly and picked up my fork, though my appetite had long vanished. I forced myself to take a bite, the taste lost in the bitterness on my tongue. Then her voice carried again. "So, are you married?" I froze mid-chew. Ethan laughed lightly. "Technically, yes, but it's just paperwork now. We're not together anymore. Just paperwork." That's what he called our marriage. I wanted to scream that I was still carrying his child, that I had spent sleepless nights worrying about him while he was apparently busy finding someone new. I swallowed hard, my throat burning. A few minutes later, he stood and excused himself from the table, walking toward the restrooms. But as he passed my table, he slowed, leaning just slightly toward me. "You shouldn't be here, Claire," he said in a low voice. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "This isn't the right night for you to be here," he continued, his eyes darting toward the blonde. "Just go home." Something in me snapped. I kept my voice calm, but there was an edge he couldn't miss. "Enjoy your dinner, Ethan." He straightened, gave a half smirk, and walked away. I sat there, my hands trembling under the tablecloth. My heart was pounding, not from sadness anymore, but from something sharper. Anger. That was when I realized this wasn't just about him moving on. He wanted to erase me. Pretend I had never been part of his life. Rewrite our history without me in it. But I wasn't gonna let him. Not tonight, not ever. I set down my fork, pushed my chair back, and took a deep breath. The rain was still falling outside, the kind of rain that could wash things clean. But inside, a storm far stronger was brewing, one that would change everything before the night was over. And if Ethan thought I was leaving quietly, it was about to be very, very wrong. My name is Claire Thompson, and I never thought my life would turn out like this. 32 years old, 7 months pregnant, and sitting alone in the same restaurant where I once thought my dreams were coming true. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, where life was slow and predictable. My parents owned a little bakery on Main Street, and I spent most of my teenage years helping them knead dough, frost cupcakes, and greet customers who knew me by name. I wasn't rich, but I had something better: love, safety, and the feeling that home was wherever my family was. When I met Ethan, I thought I had found someone who could give me that same kind of warmth for the rest of my life. We met in college. He was studying business. I was majoring in early childhood education. He was confident, charming, and made me feel like I was the only person in the room. Within a year, we were inseparable. After graduation, Ethan landed a job at a prestigious investment firm in Manhattan. I followed him there, giving up my dream of teaching in a small-town school. I found work as a preschool teacher in the city, but my life revolved around supporting his career. I cooked for his colleagues when he brought them over, attended his work events, and clapped the loudest at every promotion celebration. We married 3 years later, and for a while it was everything I'd hoped for. He would bring me flowers for no reason, leave sticky notes on the fridge saying, "Love you," and hold my hand whenever we walked through the city. I thought we were building something unbreakable. Then, the late nights started. Working late at the office became his usual excuse. I told myself he was just ambitious, that the stress of his job made him distant. But little things began to pile up. The perfume I didn't own on his shirt, the text messages he wouldn't let me see, the weekends he suddenly had business trips. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought it would bring us back together. And for a brief moment, it did. He seemed excited, even protective. But soon after, the coldness returned. Arguments became more frequent. He started sleeping in the guest room, claiming he didn't want to disturb me with his work calls. I tried to ignore the signs, to hold on to the man I married. But deep down, I knew something was breaking. And that was before I found the hotel receipt tucked in his coat pocket. A receipt for 2. I still remember the way my hands shook when I held that receipt. The date printed on it was the same night he told me he was working late. The hotel was only a few blocks from his office, too close for a business trip, too far from home for an innocent excuse. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He didn't even apologize. He just stood there, loosening his tie, looking at me like I was overreacting. "It's not what you think," he said flatly. "Then what is it, Ethan?" "Because it looks exactly like you spent the night in a hotel with someone who isn't your pregnant wife." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I don't want to do this right now." I remember feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. I was carrying his child, our future, and he couldn't even bother to fight for us. After that night, we barely spoke except about practical matters. Doctor's appointments, bills, the nursery. He started leaving earlier in the mornings and coming home later at night. I stopped waiting up for him. But here's the thing. I wasn't weak. My parents had raised me to stand on my own 2 feet, and I wasn't going to let him destroy me completely. I started saving money quietly, cutting back on things he wouldn't notice, transferring small amounts into an account he didn't know about. I didn't know when I'd need it, but something told me I would. My friends noticed the change in me. Lisa, my best friend since high school, begged me to leave him. "Claire, you deserve better," she said over coffee one morning. "He's not the same man you married." I knew she was right, but walking away was harder than I thought. Part of me still hoped Ethan would wake up one day, look at me, and remember the woman he'd fallen in love with. Then came the phone call that shattered any hope I had left. A mutual friend called to warn me that Ethan had been seen out with a blonde woman multiple times. She was young, glamorous, and worked at the same firm as him. The friend told me she was bragging in the office about stealing the boss's heart. I didn't cry. Not then. I just thanked her, hung up, and stared at the wall for a long time. From that moment, something in me shifted. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to compete. I was going to protect myself and my baby. And so, on the night of our anniversary, I walked into the Grandview Hotel's restaurant alone. Not because I wanted to remember the past, but because I was ready to face the truth. What I didn't know was that by the end of the night, I'd uncover a secret about Ethan that would change everything. The Grandview Hotel wasn't just any place. It was the place in the city where deals were sealed, engagements were celebrated, and reputations were built. Its restaurant, the Magnolia Room, was known for crystal chandeliers that dripped light like molten gold, crisp white tablecloths that looked untouched even in the busiest hours, and waiters who glided across the floor as if on invisible tracks. Tonight, the atmosphere was as polished as ever. A jazz trio in the corner played soft, velvety tunes, and the air smelled faintly of roasted garlic and butter. Every table seemed occupied by people who looked like they belonged in glossy magazines. Men in expensive suits, women with hair that never dared to frizz, diamonds catching the light with every subtle movement. I'd been here many times before with Ethan. Back then, I'd felt proud to be on his arm, wearing the dress he'd bought me for my birthday, knowing we were part of the elegant scene. But tonight, everything felt different. I wasn't part of this world anymore, at least not in the way I used to be. From my corner table, I could see almost everything. The glowing bar lined with imported liquor bottles, the private booths where whispers were traded like currency, and the wide floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the city's skyline. Beyond the glass, the rain turned the streets into ribbons of light, the reflection of neon signs shimmering on the wet pavement. I noticed the waitstaff subtly catering to Ethan and his date. The maître d' had stopped by their table twice already, offering wine recommendations and flashing his most charming smile. The blonde seemed to be eating it up, leaning back in her chair with that air of entitlement that screamed, "I belong here more than you ever will." The hum of conversations around me rose and fell like gentle waves. At the table next to mine, a man in a navy suit was telling a story about a $5 million investment. At another, a couple in their 50s laughed over dessert, their hands intertwined like they were still in high school. But no matter where I looked, my eyes kept drifting back to Ethan. He was in his element, confident, smooth, and utterly unbothered by the fact that his pregnant wife was sitting less than 30 feet away. I reached for my glass again, feeling the condensation dampen my fingers. This place wasn't just a restaurant tonight. It was a stage, and Ethan had cast himself as the leading man in his own little performance. What he didn't know was that I was done being a silent audience. The longer I sat there, the more I noticed the small details that used to make me feel special, but now made me feel like an outsider. The crystal wine glasses, polished so perfectly they caught the light like prisms. The way the waiters remembered Ethan's preferences, still medium-rare steak, still Bordeaux from the same vineyard. I could almost see the invisible thread connecting him to this place. It was his comfort zone, his territory, and tonight, he was showing it off to her like a trophy. A group of men in suits entered from the lobby, shaking off their umbrellas. One of them stopped by Ethan's table, clapping him on the back. "Ethan, I heard about the Baxter deal. Brilliant work." The blonde beamed, clearly enjoying the attention. Ethan introduced her as Sophie, and the men gave approving nods. I felt my stomach turn. Sophie. Now she had a name, and she fit the role perfectly. Elegant, poised, with a laugh that carried just far enough to draw attention without seeming forced. But what struck me most was how Ethan looked at her. It wasn't love. I knew his love. I'd lived it. This was pride, possession, like she was another achievement he could add to his list. At the far end of the restaurant, I caught sight of a large round table being set up for what looked like a corporate dinner. Silver domes gleamed under the chandelier, and bottles of champagne waited in ice buckets. The Magnolia Room was never just about food. It was about deals, alliances, and appearances. I remembered the first time Ethan had brought me here for a work function. I'd been so nervous, afraid I'd say something wrong. He had squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "Just smile, Claire. You're the most beautiful woman in the room." That memory used to warm me. Now it burned. The music shifted to a slow, bluesy number. Sophie leaned closer to Ethan, her hand brushing his. The maître d' appeared again, this time with a dessert menu, and Ethan ordered for both of them without asking what she wanted. She didn't seem to mind. I sat back, letting my hand rest on my stomach. The baby shifted slightly, as if sensing my tension. I whispered under my breath, "We're okay. I've got us." And in that moment, I realized something important. This place might be his stage, but I wasn't here to play a supporting role. Not anymore. The rain outside had grown heavier, streaking the windows with silver. Inside, the chandeliers glowed even brighter, as if daring me to step into the light. And I decided I wasn't leaving this restaurant until I made sure Ethan knew exactly who he was dealing with. Ethan James Thompson. On paper, he was the kind of man people admired: sharp, articulate, and successful. He had the kind of resume that made recruiters salivate: top of his class in business school, youngest partner at his investment firm, the man who could walk into a room and walk out with everyone's attention. But behind the polished smile and tailored suits was someone I had come to know far too well. Ethan was a man who thrived on control. When we were first together, it seemed like confidence. He would plan our vacations down to the hour, choose the wine at dinner, and tell me, "Don't worry, I've got this." I used to think it was romantic, being taken care of. But over time, it became something darker. He decided which friends were worth our time. He had opinions about which dresses I should wear. Even my teaching job became a distraction in his eyes. When he suggested I quit to focus on our future, I agreed, thinking it was temporary. But that future quickly became all about his goals. In public, he was charming. He'd pull out my chair, open doors, introduce me with pride. But at home, his patience wore thin. If dinner wasn't ready when he came back from work, there'd be a sigh, a muttered comment. If I disagreed with him in front of others, there'd be a cold silence waiting for me later. And then there was the lying. Small lies at first, about working late, about just drinks with the guys. Then bigger ones, weekend trips that didn't add up, receipts from restaurants I'd never been to, and finally, the hotel bill that shattered whatever trust was left. The thing about Ethan was that he never saw himself as the villain. He believed every decision he made was justified. If he wanted something or someone, he'd find a way to make it seem like it was his right to have it. Sophie was just the latest example. She wasn't the first woman to turn his head, but she was the one he decided to parade around publicly. And from the way she looked at him, I could tell she believed every word he fed her. I used to think the worst thing Ethan could do to me was cheat. But I was wrong. The worst thing was realizing he had been rewriting our story all along, painting himself as the hero and me as the footnote. And tonight, as I watched him smile across the table at Sophie, I knew he had no idea that his carefully crafted image was about to crack. Ethan had always been skilled at playing two different versions of himself. There was public Ethan, the polished gentleman who remembered birthdays, tipped generously, and sent flowers to his assistant's mother when she was in the hospital. Then there was private Ethan, the man who measured people by their usefulness to him, who could turn cold and cutting in a single sentence if you stopped serving his needs. I learned early in our marriage that private Ethan was the real one. Public Ethan was just a costume he wore. And like any good actor, he could switch between roles effortlessly, depending on the audience. With Sophie, I could see the performance in full swing. He leaned in just enough to make her feel like she was the only one in the room. He laughed at her jokes, even the ones that weren't funny. He touched her hand lightly, a calculated move to keep her hooked. I'd been in that exact seat before. I knew how intoxicating it could feel, until the mask slipped. The problem with Ethan was that he didn't just lie to people, he lied to himself. He believed that as long as the outside world saw him as successful, charming, and generous, then he was those things. The truth, his selfishness, his betrayals, was something he buried so deep that even he pretended it didn't exist. And that made him dangerous. I remembered a night 2 years ago, when he came home furious because a deal had fallen through. He didn't yell, but his words were sharp enough to cut. "You wouldn't understand, Claire. You've never had to fight for anything in your life." That was his way of making me feel small, of reminding me that, in his eyes, I wasn't his equal. Now watching him with Sophie, I realized he was building the same trap for her. She was in the sweet phase, where everything he did felt like proof of devotion. But the sweetness would sour. It always did. Still, there was a difference between Sophie and me. She was flaunting him in public without a second thought, as if daring anyone to challenge her place by his side. That told me she either didn't know about me, or she did, and she didn't care. Either way, she was part of the problem now. The baby kicked, startling me. It was like a jolt back to reality, a reminder that I wasn't here to wallow in old wounds. I had a reason to be strong now, someone who depended on me to protect them from people like Ethan. I took another sip of my sparkling water, my gaze never leaving his face. If Ethan thought he could keep living in his perfect little illusion, tonight was the night I'd pull the curtain back. It started with a sound, not the clinking of glasses or the soft music, but the sharp, familiar tone of Ethan's voice, louder than before. I glanced over and saw him gesturing toward the waiter, his smile gone. Sophie sat back, looking slightly embarrassed as other diners began to notice. The waiter was apologizing, something about the wine order, but Ethan waved him off impatiently. "This is ridiculous," Ethan said, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "I come here every week, and this is the service I get?" My cheeks burned, not from shame for him, but from recognition. This was the side of Ethan I knew too well, the entitled, condescending man who thrived on making others feel small. The maître had hurried over, speaking in hushed tones, but Ethan wasn't lowering his voice. Sophie tried to smooth things over, touching his arm, but he brushed her off. Then, as if fate had been waiting for the perfect cue, another voice joined in. "Claire?" I turned to see Lisa, my best friend, standing near my table. She looked shocked, glancing between me and Ethan's table. "What are you doing here? I thought—" She stopped mid-sentence as her eyes landed on Sophie. "Oh my God, that's her?" Her words weren't loud, but in the hushed elegance of the Magnolia Room, they carried farther than intended. A few heads turned. Sophie's brow furrowed, and Ethan's gaze snapped to us. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. "Lisa, this isn't your business," he said sharply. Lisa crossed her arms. "Not my business? She's carrying your child, Ethan, and you're here flaunting yourself with someone else?" The room went still. Conversations died. Even the jazz trio seemed to quiet down. Sophie looked at Ethan, confusion flashing across her face. "What is she talking about?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Sophie, let's just—" But Sophie didn't let it go. "You told me you were separated." "We are," he said quickly, his voice rising again. "She's just trying to make a scene." I rose slowly from my seat, my hands resting on my belly. "A scene? You think telling the truth is making a scene, Ethan?" All eyes were on us now. My heart was pounding, but there was no going back. And in that moment, I decided if this was going to be a scene, I was going to make sure everyone in the room remembered it. I stepped forward, the heels of my boots clicking against the marble floor. My voice was steady, even though my heart was racing. "Ethan," I said, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, "you lied to her. Just like you lied to me. And to think, this is our wedding anniversary." Gasps rippled through the room. Sophie's eyes widened, darting between us as if trying to piece together a puzzle. "Is that true?" she asked him. Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. "This is not the time or place, Claire." I tilted my head. "Oh, I think it's exactly the time and place. You brought her here, to our restaurant, on our anniversary, while your pregnant wife sat 3 tables away." The maître shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the bar where the manager now stood watching. People weren't just pretending not to listen anymore, they were openly staring. Lisa moved closer to me, her presence like a shield. "He's been lying to everyone, Claire, and if you think you're the only one, Sophie." She let the sentence hang in the air, heavy with implication. Sophie straightened, her face flushing. "How many?" she asked Ethan, her voice shaking. He ran a hand through his hair. "Sophie, please." "How many?" His silence was answer enough. The tension in the room was electric, thick enough to taste. Someone in the corner muttered, "Unbelievable," and a few others shook their heads. I took a deep breath. "I'm not here to fight for you, Ethan. I'm here to make sure you don't get to pretend you're the perfect man anymore." He glared at me, but I didn't flinch. For the first time in months, I felt taller, stronger. Then, something unexpected happened. Sophie picked up her clutch, stood, and without a word, tossed the napkin from her lap onto the table. She walked toward the exit, her heels striking the floor like a drumbeat. Ethan called after her, but she didn't turn back. The doors closed behind her with a soft thud, but the echo of her departure lingered. Now all eyes were on Ethan. He looked smaller somehow, stripped of the polish and charm he wore like armor. I stepped back toward my table, my voice calm but cutting. "Enjoy your dinner, Ethan. It's the only thing you'll be enjoying tonight." And as I sat down, the applause started, not loud but steady, coming from a corner table, then spreading across the room like a quiet storm. The moment I stepped out of the Magnolia Room, the night air hit me like a wave. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick, reflecting the glow of streetlights in blurred, watery patterns. Lisa walked beside me in silence, her arm lightly touching mine. She didn't say anything at first, and I was grateful. My head was pounding, my chest tight, and my hands felt cold despite the warmth of my coat pockets. We reached the corner before she finally spoke. "You okay?" I swallowed hard, my throat aching. "I don't know." The truth was, I wasn't. The adrenaline from confronting Ethan was fading, and in its place came a hollow, aching emptiness. It was one thing to stand up to him in front of a room full of strangers. It was another to face the reality of what my life had become. Lisa hailed a cab, but I shook my head. "I need to walk a little." So we did. My steps were slow, partly because of the pregnancy, partly because I felt like every move was heavier than the last. The city noises, the honking, the distant chatter, the hum of traffic, blurred into background static. When we reached my apartment building, Lisa hesitated. "Do you want me to stay tonight?" I forced a small smile. "I'll be okay. I just need to think." She squeezed my hand and left reluctantly. Inside my apartment, the quiet was almost unbearable. I sank onto the couch, my coat still on, and stared at the darkened window. The reflection staring back at me didn't look like the woman I used to be. My hair was slightly frizzy from the rain, my makeup smudged, my shoulders hunched like I was carrying the weight of the whole city. I pressed a hand to my belly, feeling a faint kick. It should have comforted me. Instead, it brought tears to my eyes. "How did we get here?" I whispered. I thought about the early days with Ethan, about how easily I had given him my trust. I had believed his promises, defended him to friends who questioned his behavior, even convinced myself that the red flags weren't real. Now the illusion had shattered completely, and the pieces were too sharp to pick up. I leaned back, closing my eyes, but sleep didn't come. My mind replayed every look, every word from tonight, until it all blurred together. And somewhere in that haze, the fear crept in. What if I wasn't strong enough to raise this baby alone? I stayed on the couch for what felt like hours, staring into the dark. The city outside kept moving, sirens in the distance, the low rumble of the subway under the street, but inside I was frozen. When my phone buzzed, I didn't have to check to know who it was. Ethan. I ignored the first call, then the second. By the third, I picked up, more out of exhaustion than anything else. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. "Claire, about tonight." "Don't," I cut in. "Don't spin it. Don't tell me I misunderstood. I saw everything I needed to see." He was silent for a moment before saying, "You embarrassed me." I almost laughed. "You embarrassed yourself. I just stopped letting you hide it." "You're making this harder than it has to be," he said, his tone shifting to the cold, measured one I knew too well. "We could settle things quietly. You'd get the support you need." Support. As if I hadn't been supporting him for years, emotionally, financially, socially, while he tore our life apart. I hung up without another word. After that, the tears finally came. Not the delicate kind you see in movies, but the messy, unstoppable sobs that leave you gasping for air. I curled on the couch, my hands cradling my belly, apologizing to my baby for bringing them into this chaos. When the sobs slowed, I forced myself to get up. I moved through the apartment, turning on lights, making tea, anything to keep my hands busy. But no matter what I did, the emptiness clung to me. I thought about calling my parents, but it was late, and I didn't want them to hear me like this. They'd come rushing to the city, worried sick. I needed to figure out what to do before involving them. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the rain start again, light but steady. The glass was cool against my forehead. I whispered to myself, "You can't fall apart. Not now." But deep down I felt like I already had. The fear was still there, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. Fear of raising a child alone, fear of making ends meet, fear that I'd never feel whole again. I didn't have the answers yet. All I had was the quiet, the rain, and the tiny heartbeat inside me, reminding me I wasn't truly alone. And in that fragile, uncertain moment, I made myself a silent promise. I would survive this, somehow. 2 days after the night at the Magnolia Room, I was still feeling raw, like my skin had been scraped thin. I hadn't left the apartment except for a quick trip to the grocery store. Then, one afternoon, there was a knock at my door. It wasn't Lisa or my parents. It was Michael Hayes, a man I hadn't seen in nearly a year. He was an old friend of Ethan's, someone I'd always liked because he was polite, soft-spoken, and didn't treat me like an accessory. "Claire," he said, his voice low, "we need to talk." I stepped aside and let him in, confused. He didn't sit down right away. Instead, he glanced around as if making sure we were alone. "I know what happened the other night," he began, "and I think you deserve to know something." I braced myself. "What is it?" "It's about Ethan, about the firm." My stomach tightened. "Go on." He hesitated, then handed me a manila envelope. Inside were photocopies, emails, contracts, bank transfers. My eyes skimmed the pages, the words blurring together until one phrase jumped out at me. Fraudulent investment scheme. I looked up sharply. "What is this?" Michael's expression was grim. "Ethan's been moving client money into fake accounts. Millions, Claire. He's covering it up with falsified reports. I think the SEC is already looking into him." For a moment I couldn't speak. I thought I knew all the ways Ethan could betray me, but this was on another level. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. "Because I know what he's capable of," Michael said. "And because when this blows up, he'll try to drag you down with him. You're still legally married. You need to protect yourself now." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I pressed a hand to my forehead. I can't believe this. But deep down, I could. The control, the arrogance, it all made sense now. Ethan had been building this lie for years, just like he built the lies in our marriage. Michael leaned forward. "I can help you. I have more evidence. If you give this to the right people, you can make sure he pays for what he's done." I looked down at the papers again, my fingers trembling. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was criminal. And for the first time in a long while, I realized I had the power to destroy him completely. I sat there, staring at the stack of documents on my coffee table, feeling the weight of every page. This wasn't just proof. It was a weapon. Michael stayed quiet, letting me process. Finally, I asked, "If you have all this, why haven't you gone to the authorities yourself?" His jaw tightened. "Because if they know it came from me, my career is over. But if it comes from you, you're the wronged wife. You're untouchable in their eyes." It was a cruel truth, but I understood. The image of Ethan's smug face from the restaurant flashed in my mind. The way he'd brushed me off, the way he'd lied without blinking. Now, I had the power to strip away everything he valued. His money, his status, his precious reputation. Still, a part of me hesitated. Not because I felt sorry for him, those days were long gone, but because this would be the point of no return. Once I handed this over, there would be no undoing it. Michael must have sensed my conflict. "Claire, he won't stop. Men like Ethan, they never stop until someone makes them. You have the chance to be that someone." I ran my hand over my belly, feeling the faint movement inside. My child deserved a future without this shadow hanging over us. I deserved it too. "I'll do it," I said finally. My voice was steadier than I expected. Michael nodded. "Good. I'll arrange a meeting with someone at the SEC. But until then, keep this locked away. And Claire, be careful. If he suspects you know, he could try to get to you first." After he left, I sat alone again, but this time the silence felt different. Less like a void, and more like the calm before a storm. My storm. I placed the envelope in the back of my bedroom closet, behind a stack of old blankets. Then I stood in front of the mirror, really looking at myself. My eyes were tired, but there was a spark there I hadn't seen in months. For the first time since Ethan's betrayal, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt like I was swimming toward something. I didn't know exactly how it would play out. I didn't know if there would be more pain before the victory. But I knew this much. Ethan's days of control were numbered, and when the end came, it wouldn't be quiet. It would be the kind of ending he'd never recover from. The morning after Michael's visit, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. For weeks, maybe months, I had been surviving, just getting through each day. But now, I had a purpose. I stood in front of my closet, scanning rows of clothes that felt like they belonged to another life. The soft sweaters, the floral dresses, the muted colors, all choices Ethan used to approve of. It was like my entire wardrobe was designed to make me blend into the background. Not anymore. I pulled out my phone and called Lisa. "I need your help," I said. "We're going shopping." She didn't ask questions, just told me to meet her at noon. We spent the afternoon in boutiques I'd never dared to enter before. Places with bright lighting, confident salespeople, and clothes that made you stand a little taller. When I emerged from the fitting room in a sleek black maternity dress with a sharp blazer, Lisa whistled. "Claire, you look like you could walk into a boardroom and take over." "That's the idea," I said, smiling for real this time. It wasn't just about the clothes. It was about reclaiming parts of myself I'd buried. My voice, my confidence, my presence. I booked a haircut, letting the stylist take off the tired split ends. I switched to bold red lipstick, a color Ethan once said was too loud for me. When I got home, I started organizing my life with the same precision Ethan used to control me. I made lists, people to call, documents to prepare, things I'd need once the investigation into Ethan began. I even set up a meeting with a lawyer, one recommended by Michael, who specialized in protecting spouses from legal fallout in financial crimes. Sitting in her office, explaining my situation, I felt the shift happening inside me. I wasn't the woman who'd cried on the couch 2 nights ago. I was someone building a strategy. The baby kicked as I left the lawyer's office, and I took it as a sign. This wasn't just for me anymore. This was for us. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was steering my own life instead of just holding on. Over the next week, the transformation wasn't just physical, it was mental. Every morning, I woke up earlier, made myself a healthy breakfast, and dressed like I had somewhere important to be, even if it was just the lawyer's office or the bank. Lisa noticed the difference. "You're glowing," she said one afternoon as we sat at a cafe. "It's not just the pregnancy," I told her. "It's knowing I'm not trapped anymore." We went over my plan, step by step. The meeting with the SEC was set for the following Monday. Michael had given me additional files, audio recordings of phone calls, screenshots of text messages, everything tying Ethan to the fraudulent accounts. At the same time, my lawyer was filing the paperwork for divorce. She advised me to move fast, to ensure Ethan couldn't claim any marital assets once the investigation went public. I took her advice seriously. I opened a new bank account in my name only, transferred the savings I'd been stashing away, and started looking for a new apartment in a quieter part of the city. Somewhere safe, where my baby could grow up far from the chaos Ethan created. One evening, while sorting through old files, I came across a photo from our honeymoon. We were standing on a beach, Ethan's arm around me, both of us laughing at something the photographer said. I stared at it for a long time, then placed it in a box marked evidence. It wasn't a memory anymore. It was a reminder of who he pretended to be. My phone buzzed again. Ethan's name on the screen. I didn't answer. He'd left a dozen voicemails over the past week, each one more desperate than the last. I knew he was starting to feel the walls closing in, though he didn't know yet that I was the one building them. The night before the SEC meeting, I stood in front of my mirror, fully dressed in the black blazer and red lipstick. I imagined walking into that office, handing over the evidence, and watching the first domino fall. I wasn't the scared, broken woman who had left the Magnolia Room in tears. I was ready for war. And this time, Ethan wouldn't see me coming until it was far too late. The SEC meeting was nothing like I expected. It was calmer, quieter, almost clinical. 2 agents sat across from me in a conference room, their notebooks open, pens ready. Michael was there too, though he kept his distance, letting me speak for myself. I laid the evidence out piece by piece, emails, contracts, bank transfers, even the audio recordings. I explained what I knew, what I suspected, and what Michael had told me. The agents listened intently, asking precise questions. Every answer I gave felt like another nail in Ethan's coffin. By the time we were done, one of them said, "Mrs. Thompson, this is substantial. We'll be in touch very soon." Walking out of that office, I felt lighter. It wasn't over, not yet, but the wheels were in motion. 3 days later, I got the call. The SEC had coordinated with local law enforcement. Ethan was going to be served with a subpoena at a corporate gala that weekend. And here's the part that made it poetic. It was the same annual charity gala Ethan had once taken me to, where he'd introduced me to his colleagues as the future mother of my children. I wasn't going to miss it. Lisa helped me prepare. I wore the sleek black maternity gown we'd picked out together, with diamond earrings my mother had given me. My hair was styled in soft waves, my makeup bold but elegant. When I walked into the ballroom that night, heads turned. I knew I looked like I belonged there, not as Ethan's wife, but as someone in her own right. I spotted him across the room, standing with a group of executives. His face faltered when he saw me, a flicker of surprise breaking through his confident mask. He started toward me, but before he could reach me, a pair of men in dark suits intercepted him. One of them showed a badge. The other handed him an envelope. The room quieted. Cameras, both from the press and from curious guests, turned toward the commotion. Ethan's voice rose. "This is ridiculous. You can't just—" But they could, and they did. And I stood there, watching the man who once controlled my life lose control in front of everyone who ever mattered to him. Ethan's protests echoed through the ballroom, his voice cracking under the weight of humiliation. The agents remained calm, speaking just loud enough for the nearby guests to hear words like financial misconduct, fraud investigation, and misappropriation of funds. The whispers spread like wildfire. People he had once charmed now looked at him with suspicion, some with outright disgust. His business partners stepped back, as if afraid his downfall might be contagious. I stood near the edge of the crowd, a glass of sparkling water in hand, watching every second. Lisa joined me, her smile faint but triumphant. "You couldn't have scripted it better," she whispered. Ethan caught sight of me then. For a split second, our eyes locked, and I saw something I'd never seen before: fear. Real, unfiltered fear. He tried to push past the agents toward me, but they blocked him. "Sir, you need to calm down and cooperate," one of them said firmly. "You did this," he hissed across the distance, his voice low but sharp enough to carry. I didn't flinch. "No, Ethan, you did this to yourself." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Someone from the press snapped a photo at just the right moment. Ethan mid-glare, me standing tall in my gown, unshaken. I had no doubt it would be in tomorrow's papers. The agents led him toward the exit, his protests fading into the hum of shocked conversation. I turned away before he was completely gone, refusing to give him the satisfaction of my lingering attention. As the crowd slowly returned to their champagne and small talk, several people approached me, former acquaintances, colleagues of Ethan, offering polite sympathy and quiet admiration. It was strange being seen not as his wife, but as someone who had stood her ground. Lisa nudged me. "Ready to go?" I glanced around the glittering room one last time. The chandeliers still sparkled, the string quartet still played softly, but for me, the night was over. My mission was complete. We walked out together, stepping into the cool night air. The city felt different somehow, like it had given me back a piece of myself I thought I'd lost forever. And as the car pulled away from the curb, I realized this wasn't just Ethan's ending. It was my beginning. The weeks following the gala felt surreal. The story of Ethan's public humiliation spread quickly, first through whispers in corporate circles, then in the press. Articles detailed the investigation, splashing his name alongside words like fraud and embezzlement. I didn't revel in it. Not exactly. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. And justice was finally moving in my favor. One morning I got a call from my lawyer. "Claire," she said, "Ethan's assets are frozen. The SEC has enough to proceed, and it looks like there will be criminal charges." I thanked her, feeling an almost physical release in my chest. For months, I had lived under the shadow of his power. Now, he was the one boxed in, forced to answer for every lie he had built. By then, I had already moved into a new apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom on a quiet street with a park nearby. The walls were painted a soft cream, the floors warm oak. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Every inch of it felt safe. Lisa helped me set up the nursery. We painted the walls pale yellow, assembled the crib, and hung a mobile of little paper stars above it. One evening, as we were folding baby clothes, she looked at me and said, "You know, you're not the same woman I met in that restaurant a few months ago." "I know," I replied. And I meant it. I had learned to live without fear of Ethan's voice, without waiting for his approval. I had learned to make decisions for myself, to stand my ground. And somewhere in the process, I'd found the strength I didn't know I had. The baby's due date was approaching fast, and with it came a sense of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. I wanted my child to grow up knowing that their mother had faced something dark and refused to let it break her. One afternoon, as I walked through the park, I saw a little girl chasing her puppy, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. I smiled, my hand resting on my belly. I realized then that this was my second chance, not just to rebuild, but to build better. A month later, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Holding him for the first time was like stepping into sunlight after years in the dark. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and I knew instantly that everything I had fought for, every tear, every sleepless night, had led me to this moment. News of Ethan's trial reached me a few weeks later. The charges were extensive: wire fraud, securities fraud, embezzlement. His bail was denied. For a man who had once thrived on being untouchable, the reality of a prison cell must have been unbearable. I didn't attend the trial. I didn't need to. Justice wasn't about watching him fall. It was about knowing he could never hurt me or our son again. Life began to settle into a new rhythm. Early mornings with the baby, afternoons at the park, evenings with Lisa or my parents. I wasn't rich, but I had enough. The court granted me full custody and a portion of Ethan's remaining legal assets, though by the time the lawyers were done, there wasn't much left. And that was fine, because for the first time, I wasn't measuring my worth by what I had. One evening, I sat on the balcony of my apartment, rocking my son as the sun dipped below the skyline. The city lights flickered on, one by one, like stars waking up. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who stayed silent to keep the peace, who let someone else define her life. She was gone. In her place was someone who had walked through the fire and come out stronger. Someone who knew that love without respect wasn't love at all. Someone who understood that endings can be the start of something far greater. I kissed my son's forehead and whispered, "You'll never see me afraid, not ever." As the night deepened, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was free. And if my story means anything, it's this: no matter how deeply someone tries to bury you, you can grow back, taller, stronger, and unstoppable.